Hey guys, welcome to Finally Clicked, the podcast where we discuss business, leadership, and personal development. My name is Margaret Smith, and I'm the Director of Operations for Pickett Street Properties, a real estate team out of Bothell, Washington. And I'll be here every week with our owner and team leader, Jesse D. Moore. We'll be digging into concepts and ideas that have helped us both personally and professionally. And you'll also get a chance to hear from local and national experts that we know provide massive value to get to the point where it all finally clicks. Hey guys, how's it going? This is Margaret Smith with Pickett Street and
Jesse Moore, also with Pickett Street Properties. And it's an exciting day, Margaret.
It is. Why is it an exciting day? I mean, every day is exciting.
Every day is exciting. But today especially, we're going to do a little bit of a book review today. Mm-hmm. My kids are now at the age where they're having to do book reviews for school.
Oh, really?
The first one is due on Monday.
Oh, God.
It's caused a lot of stress and anxiety.
What's the book?
Well, they each have a different book. Actually,
both
what's
of
kind
them.
of awesome is Braden, my bonus son, he is reading Jocko Willink's children's book.
Really?
The Way of the Warrior Child.
Oh, God, I didn't know he had a child's book. That's cool.
I saw that he had a book. So for those that don't know, Jocko Willink is a Navy SEAL who wrote a book called Extreme Ownership.
It's excellent.
Excellent book.
Yeah.
And
did Braden pick that out on his own?
No, good Lord, no. So I saw that he had a children's book, right, that kind of talked about the principles of extreme ownership, but, you know, in a language appropriate for children. And I thought, what a great way to teach kids about discipline.
Oh, yeah.
So I got this book called The Way of the Warrior Kid, I think is what it's called. And it's been around the house, and it's been something I wanted to read to my sons. And the day came when he needed a book for a book report, and he picked that one out. And so now he's reading it, and he's learning about how discipline equals freedom.
Wow.
And how discipline equals love. And it's been interesting. So
has he talked to you about it at all? Yeah.
He is not. I mean, he and his mom talk about it more. Mm-hmm. I'll definitely quiz him towards the end.
And what are Selah and David doing?
And David, I mean, they both got library books. Selah always gets a book about a dog or an animal of some sort.
So then is it like a one-page write-up they have to do by Monday? Wow.
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah, that sounds intense.
Yeah, so, today we are not reviewing a Jocko Willink book. We are not reviewing a book about a dog.
No.
We are going to talk about The Four Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz.
Good pronunciation.
I should probably roll my R.
You put, yeah.
Don Miguel Ruiz.
That was better. Dan would approve.
It could be totally wrong. I apologize for my Spanglish.
This is a great little book. Super quick read.
I would say this is in my top 2 books for 2018.
Top
that
2?
I read.
Wow.
That I read. Obviously, this was printed, in 1997. So this is new to me, but not new in general.
Yeah, no, there were, I don't know if I'd put it in my top 2, but I mean, I'd have to look back at my list. I'm kind of a list person. Probably top 5 though.
For 2018.
For 2018.
Gee whiz, you have a lot of good books for 2018.
There were some really good ones.
I think
but
I
have
have
to say, this is the one.
Standards.
This is the one that I actually handed out the most, though. I gave it to my mom, and my mom has recently become a reader. And in her, what is she, 64 now? In her 64 years of living, she's done more crafting than she has reading. She has a really hard time sitting down to read, and so I've been shocked actually at the things that she's chosen to pick up and read, and it's because of what we're doing, and it's helping her a lot with her mindset. And she already has a pretty awesome mindset, so it's been...
So did she read this book?
She did.
And?
She read it. And she's really taking to heart, one of the agreements is the don't take it personal. That's the one she needed to focus on the most. And so she's, if anything else, she's just repeating to herself, don't take it personal, don't take it personal. And then she picks it up and she'll read parts of that chapter again to remind herself. So it's cool.
Well, I thought, okay, so I was thinking about talking about this today. And I know that we have said we're going to be vulnerable and transparent. Which I think at times is going to be a challenge because... well,
this is going out to anybody and everybody who wants to listen.
Right, and we all have some pain and suffering in our past.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll just say it this way. What's interesting about this book is The Four Agreements is essentially like a rule book for how to operate in life.
Yeah.
And it's really synthesized into, 4 elements, which is, that's a lot of synthesis to break everything down into
I really
4
appreciate
things,
synthesis
right?
like that. That's like what I strive for.
And so what I find interesting about this book is that I think it's really beneficial to anyone that has any belief system. Mm-hmm. You could be a Christian, a Buddhist, a Hindu, atheist, all of those things. And it's essentially principles for life, regardless of belief or doctrine.
Yep. And I love that too.
Now, and I think that's how it should be received anyway. I'm sure so let me back up a little bit. I grew up in a heavily Protestant household that had a tendency to demonize anything it didn't either understand or
just wasn't within that doctrine,
or that somebody else had labeled as incorrect or impure or whatever the case may be. And so I found myself as an adult not really in alignment with a lot of the beliefs that I had been taught as a child, and I've actually been seeking for an agreement. I've been looking for an agreement in a belief system that I can back 100%, and this is it for me. Like I can stand behind every one of these tenets in this book, and so I think I told you to order a case of books before we were done with the book.
Oh yeah, and then we're now sending it out to our clients.
And even
loyalty club. In
our coaching sessions, I reference it every time. Just about, don't I?
Oh yeah.
Are you annoyed with me yet for referencing the 4 agreements?
Not yet. I'll let you know when that happens.
So let's discuss the 4 agreements so that people know what we're talking about. Okay. I do also want to talk about the introduction. I think
I do too.
The introduction is such an interesting.
I loved it.
It's great writing, number one. And for those that don't know, I am an English major. I have a degree in English literature.
I'm a critique of the English language.
And you are a murderer of the English language. And because I have a degree in English literature, I am a little more...
attuned?
No, not attuned.
I'm attuned.
I think I have a lot more judgment when it comes to the style of writing. And
yeah.
But anyway, it's very well written. In that first chapter, The Domestication and the Dream of the Planet, is basically saying that we are blank slates when we're born, and then we are imprinted upon, and we can't help it. That's the way of the world. If anything, we become programmed to act a certain way, believe certain things, either consciously or unconsciously. And at some point in our lives, we make agreements to act a certain way, even if it's counterintuitive to our nature. Yeah. Because we learn from those around us how to act, how to behave, how to think. Everything.
Yeah. That's why when he says on page 11, he says, that is why we need a great deal of courage to challenge our own beliefs. Because even if we know we didn't choose all those beliefs, it's also true that we agreed to all of them. And I remember you said to me, part of that kind of freaked you out a little bit as you were going through the intro. You were like, whether I realize it or not, I've just created my kid's world. And there might be some things in there that I don't want in there. But it's pretty much impossible. I mean, so that's why to focus on what you really want them to hear and learn, and just kind of, you have to realize that mistakes are going to happen. But what are those main things, those agreements that you really want them to understand?
Well, and I think in life, it's difficult to know. If I'm my child and I'm thinking, believe me, as I parent my children, I realize that it's conflicting and that I say conflicting things at times. What I mean by that is at times it's like, don't touch that. And at other times it's like, okay to touch that or don't do this, but do it in certain situations. And to the point where analysis paralysis can set in and your beliefs and what you've been taught kind of contradict each other. Yeah. And when that happens, I think it creates conflict in our lives. So the basic premise is that as we then mature and become adults and we start to figure out what we believe in for ourselves, we have to unprogram some things we have been taught, some things that have been programmed in us. And then we have to really kind of synthesize our lives into what are 4 principles that we won't violate at all.
And I really think, like, I had a completely different upbringing from Jesse. And we talk about that often. And so the 4 agreements make a lot of sense with me. And I think my parents both absolutely used these with us as we were growing up. But what I've had to unprogram myself from is living in kind of like this safety zone. So when he says in that quote too, he says on page 11, the agreement is so strong, but that even if we understand the concept of it not being true, we feel the blame, the guilt, and the shame that occur if we go against these rules. So I've gone against the rules of what my parents have taught me, in that I've taken more risks financially that they have in the last few years. And I've also done more traveling, which freaks my mom out. And so I go through this period, I realize when I make a decision and I think about what they would want me to do, because that's what I think a lot of kids do. And then I've had to go against it. And it's like, I get this period of 24 hours, I think, where I'm like, oh, I feel so bad, but I know my mom will support me and love me, and same with my dad. So it's like understanding where that came from and what's right and what's wrong and what you're about. And my mom loves the person I am. My dad loves who I am now, and they admire what I'm doing. So I think that ultimately, beyond these 4 rules, these 4 concepts, these 4 agreements, it's the love and support that backs up your kids that they goes back to. And if they feel that love and support, then they can make the decisions that they think are best for themselves.
Well, I think it's also true. It goes back to a lack of love and a lack of support.
100%,
right?
which is, where you're coming from.
So for those that don't know, Margaret has arguably the best family in the world. Wouldn't you say? I mean,
it's very hard to argue that. I do agree.
You're very well adjusted.
Very well.
As a human being.
Yeah.
I
consider it one of my superpowers that they gave me that I didn't have to fight for or work for. It's just a superpower because I can go on and do things with no fear in a way.
Yeah, and if anyone meets your mom, they become an adopted child of hers.
Mm-hmm.
Her
most recent adoption is Christina Jaggles.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Who is a friend that you'll be hearing from on occasion on our podcast. But my point is Margaret had all the best programming of anybody I know, as far as from your parental unit, like just solid to the core.
Solid, ability to explore things, explore topics, explore concepts with them, and they don't take offense. They are open-minded about it. They may not agree with it, but they're willing to talk about it.
Which your family members were allowed to throw poop on the wall.
Well, not technically allowed. It's a sign of a creative child.
Oh,
but for those of you that don't know my brothers, Benjamin, I have a set of twins, and then my brother Matt is right below me in age. And my brother Ben was a tyrant. He was the kind of kid that would hold his breath until he passed out. The kind of kid that Jesse could not have any patience for. And he did throw poop on the walls and entice his brother Addison to spread it all over the place with him. And that's a story that we talk about all the time. But
right. And if I saw that, I'd have to sell my house. I'd have to sell my house.
You'd have to sell your house. You would.
Yeah. And then in contrast to Margaret, my upbringing was very rigid, very structured, very much governed by the belief system of the religion that my parents subscribed to. And then anything outside of that was literally demonized. Anything that didn't fit within that construct was unacceptable, inappropriate, all sorts of things. The above. So for me, reading a book and challenging that belief system almost destroyed me.
Yeah, understandably so. Not to mention, just if we even look outside of your house, the environment of Montana in the middle of a ranch, on a 40,000 acre ranch, compared to me living in a suburb of Seattle and just having access to things that you didn't have access to until you moved out here.
Right. I didn't see a lot of contrary, which is kind of interesting now. I actually feel like I'm well qualified to bridge the gap between Republicans and Democrats and atheists and Christians and
all over the
Christians
board.
And any other religion, quite honestly. So because I know exactly why Montanans think the way they do. I know why ranchers think the way they do. I know why Christians think the way they do. And now, having been a Seattle resident for 17 years, I feel like I have a pretty good idea of that side of the coin as well. And so now, as we read through this book, number one, the first agreement is be impeccable with your word. And I will be the first to say that this is not something that I carried with me my entire life, but that I've subscribed to for the last 4 years.
How so?
Don't you think?
Well, what are you thinking of?
Well, be impeccable with your word. I think because I was unsure of who I was as a person and what I believed in, that I often tried to please people by saying what they wanted me to say or doing what they wanted me to do. And even if it wasn't authentic or real or true.
Yeah.
And that got really confusing over time. And I know this may not make sense to a lot of people in our general audience unless you knew my story to a greater degree. But just suffice it to say, I'm good at sales. I'm a good communicator. I might have been a master manipulator at times in my life. A narcissist, in part, for sure. Therapy, a lot of the focus was on narcissism and where that comes from. And I think narcissists are really bad at this first agreement, being impeccable with your word, because it's so tied into how you feel as an individual. And when you're a narcissist. So here's what I mean by that. If I care about what everyone thinks of me, then I'm not always going to tell the truth. Right? Yeah. Because there are things that are true that are not complimentary. And if you're a narcissist and you think the world revolves around you, then you end up believing things that aren't true for the sake of protecting that identity, for the sake of pretending everything is awesome and great and everything is amazing. You end up deceiving yourself into believing that's true. Because the alternative is that you're a flawed human being and you need to work on some things. And that doesn't really enter into the world of a narcissist.
So did you not believe that you were flawed at all prior to? Because I would say your personal development really started like 6 or 7 years ago, because it was right before I met you, I think, that you told me you had started by taking the personality assessment and really delving into that.
Yeah, my personal development started 7 years ago. When I was 34 years old, I realized I was a different person than what I had been pretending to be. And I realized that I didn't know what that meant, and it scared the bejesus out of me. And personal development came at a huge cost to me. Made me very uncomfortable. It's made me look at some things that I had assumed to be true my entire life. And it placed seeds of doubt throughout every cell of my existence, every memory I had. And so having to reinvent myself, at 34, I started to reinvent myself and started to listen to my true nature and try to figure out what I believed for myself versus what I'd been taught. And that really came to a head when I was probably 38, when I got separated and divorced. And the reason why it came to a head then is my belief structure at the time was that you couldn't get divorced. Like, that was not an option. It would never happen. And then in the culmination, as I became more and more in tune with what I believed to be true and how I wanted to live my life, divorce was inevitable.
So before this, though, going back to my other question, did you think that you had flaws prior to personal development?
Again, I think I knew that I had them, but I wouldn't allow myself to believe them.
Okay, gotcha.
Because, I mean, again, I was so screwed up that I would, even if it was true, I would delude myself into believing that it wasn't true. So, because it worked for my construct. Okay. And if I started to allow cracks in that armor, I didn't know what I'd find underneath. Okay, that makes sense. If you strip away all the facade of someone who is a narcissist, who isn't being authentic, their biggest fear is being exposed for who they are. And the reason they're fearful of that is because they don't know who they are. And so you don't want exposed when you don't know what's going to show up. Yeah. Right.
Yeah. Scary.
So when I think I could have read this at a time and it says be impeccable with your word, and I would have been like, this isn't going to happen. Like, this is going to cost me relationships. This is going to cost me business. This is going to cost me all sorts of things. And then what I would say is in the last 4 years, I'm absolutely impeccable with my word. I tell the truth no matter the consequence.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, we were in an interview with someone, a recruit, yesterday, and he got emotional, which is interesting because I think I mentioned this. I don't know if it's true. I might need you to confirm it. But I think I'm batting 1,000 that anyone we've ever interviewed has cried at one point or another during the interview process.
At one point or another. Well,
pretty close.
And an interview that you've been a part of.
Okay. Yeah, sure. That I've been a part of.
Yeah. That's weird.
So this gentleman cried during the interview process because we made him recall something and that triggered him emotionally. And our way of saying that was okay was by saying, hey, we are impeccable with our word and we believe in authenticity and we live our lives out loud. Meaning we don't have secrets. We don't, if it's, I believe if I am who I am, then I can say that. I can say who I am.
Yeah.
Without fear of reprisal or judgment. And quite honestly, by being impeccable with our word, it makes it easier for us to choose who's going to be in our orbit. Don't you think?
Oh, yeah, 100% completely. I think the part that was focusing on that you kind of brought in the other side of this piece was how I realize how much words can create something. And whenever I forget that and I say something that's like detrimental or negative about myself, you say, Margaret, that your words manifest something. And that's something that your mom told you. And I realize I grew up around my mom who had positive affirmations around the house. And I don't want to go so far to say, like, I don't believe that we should all say, to your kids, you can do anything you want to do, because that's not truth. And Gary Vaynerchuk talks about that a lot. But I do believe that how you speak brings intent and can manifest positive or negative.
Well, I'll introduce a scientific term, and I'm not a scientist, but I love this story because it applies. So in science, you've heard of the placebo effect. And the placebo, I'm not a scientist, okay? If I screw this up, give me some grace. But the placebo effect essentially is the idea that our brain, if we believe something is true, then our body responds accordingly. So we could take a sugar pill, but if we have the understanding that it's going to make us feel energetic and less depressed, then we end up feeling energetic and less depressed. What I've just learned is that there's the nocebo effect as well, which is the opposite of the placebo effect. Basically saying that if you believe something can hurt you, then that is also true. So you could take a pill and say, this is going to make my hair fall out and make hives break out all over my body. And it happens. In fact, the reason this came up and the reason I know about this is about gluten intolerance. And where did all this gluten allergy come from and gluten intolerance come from? And the scientists that I heard talk about it said there's some interesting studies being done where they're telling people in advance if they're gluten intolerant or not.
Oh, wow.
Irregardless of the science. And saying, and just to create a control group. One that says, okay, you're gluten intolerant. This one that says you're not gluten intolerant. And then realizing that then feeding them gluten. But they're not actually being fed gluten. But they have then all the manifestations of having been eating gluten and being gluten intolerant. And they weren't fed gluten and they weren't gluten intolerant, but they manifested all the negative aspects of it.
I love that kind of stuff. Those stories fascinate me.
Right. So placebo effect, nocebo effect. Our mind is a powerful thing. Words are powerful. And so by only speaking truth, man, you create a totally different
Well, yeah, and you reminded me, by that story, you reminded me, there's a lot of artists that have done all sorts of exhibits where they have water connected through some sort of electronic device to their body, and they choose a certain feeling, and then the water is affected by how they feel, if they focus on and concentrate on that, because 70% of our body is water. And so that just got me thinking, because I watched another video the other day about this, and how you think and feel absolutely is going to impact the water in your body, which is then going to impact everything else. It's like, whether we realize it or not, that's why I'm so hyped up on just being positive and having positive people around me all the time, because I've realized my energy absolutely is impacted by the people around me. It can go up, it can go down, and I can also choose to have it go up or go down.
That's why you are employed here, is because I was trying to control.
Do my energy.
Well, I was trying to control the energy around me.
Yeah.
I had an assistant that was a black hole of energy, and I wouldn't even walk by her office because it would affect me. And I'm like, okay, I can't live this way. I can't avoid my assistant. And so when I realized that, and I realized I had to get a new assistant, I told you, I think I told you in the interview process that I needed you to be a ray of sunshine. And I needed you to be responsible for the energy of the office. And I don't think I could have done a better job of picking somebody for that.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I knew right away. I was like, oh, that's no problem. I do that anytime, every day anyways. So.
All right. The second agreement is don't take anything personally.
This is a big one.
Why is this a big one, Margaret?
I think this is probably, let's see. This is probably the biggest one for me because I feel that it's a habit and part of human nature to think that it's about you, even if you're not a narcissist. I think it's natural to say, oh my gosh, was that about me? Did they do that because of me? And so he talks about it on the back of the book. He says that basically we have some long suffering, needless suffering that happens with self-limiting beliefs that rob us of joy. And I think this is one of them. I think by thinking everything is about you and taking it personally, you just have then hours upon days, upon weeks, upon months, upon years of suffering that where that energy could have been used somewhere else, positive. And for me, I'm definitely an introvert, and I'm definitely someone who wants to make sure that I don't do anything negative in someone else's life. So if I feel like I have, or if I feel like there's something that's not been explained, that bridge that you talked about earlier the bridge hasn't been there, I will spend countless hours on it, countless of wasted time. So that's what I've really been focusing on since we read this.
I think of us as animals all the time. And you know this, right? Yeah. But and the reason I think we need reminding sometimes that we are animals. Yeah. And that if you take away the cities and the roads and the internet and cars and the Kardashians, that we are feral cats, feral dogs, we are wild horses. We are preconditioned to respond a certain way based on biological evolution to look out for ourselves and protect ourselves. And so I think this is tied into that. When I think about us not taking things personally, I think about us acting like feral cats or feral dogs, where if you approach one, you don't have any ill intent to these animals, but they suspect that you do. Yeah. Right? And it takes time and soft touch and consistency to change their minds. Yeah. And I think as humans, we should be better than that. We should adapt more quickly than that. And so this premise to me, don't take anything personally, really means kind of taking your armor off when you engage with people. Like, I really feel like this is like being a feral cat and coming up to somebody and letting them pet you and letting them feed you and letting them pick you up versus hissing at them and hiding under a garbage can. You know what I mean? Like, and so this don't take anything personally. Man, before my transformation, I took everything personally. I mean, I took it as a badge of honor that I took it personally. I was bristly, and people thought I was bristly, right? People still think I'm bristly.
We're working through that.
But
totally.
This idea, in fact, the one thing that it says that I underlined in here is on 58, it says, if someone is not treating you with love and respect, it is a gift if they walk away from you. And so I think taking things personally, I think you probably hold on to things longer than you should, right? Because
I perseverate on it.
Oh, perseverate.
I love that word.
But because it matters so much to you, and then you start to collect these wounds, and then you...
Well, yeah, for sure. I was the type of person that didn't let people go. One of my biggest things that I pride myself in is having a large group of acquaintances or a network and a family and people in my life. And I absolutely have a lot of grace for people, and I want to work super hard. But what I've realized, and the big learning curve for me over the last 5 years, is there are some people that simply do not serve me. And it's nothing against them. I have to sometimes think about Margaret. Sometimes, because I spend so much time thinking and serving other people.
You and I were both that way at one point, and it caused misery. I can think of examples for you that cost you misery for over a year.
Oh, yeah, easily. Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Move on to the third agreement.
Yeah.
Third agreement. Don't make assumptions.
I liked this one because I think we talked in our team meeting about how this applied in real estate. We don't ever want to assume anything that we know anything about a client, or we assume someone's story. We always ask questions and come from a place of curiosity. And so, I mean, this translates across everything in life. Never making assumptions.
Yeah, I think, we're going to mention, I told you in the first podcast that we would mention fierce conversations quite often, and I'm going to do that now. I think don't make assumptions is the same as staying curiosity from fierce conversations. And that has become an important tenet for us. And like we wear that like a badge of honor, that we come from curiosity, that we don't judge anything right at the outset of it. And so I think what's important about not making assumptions is realizing that we're just trying to find a shared perspective, that our perspective is uniquely ours, and it comes from our programming and our upbringing and our belief system. And then when we use language as some sort of tertiary connection to try to relate to one another, but we have different meanings for words. We have different backgrounds for those words being said and how they were said. There's phrases I could use that I could tell you that probably wouldn't mean anything, but if you said them to me, they were abusive to me. And I would become defensive and withdraw. Right?
Yeah, totally.
And so that's why assumptions are the worst, because it's cheating communicating.
Yeah. Well, that's exactly what he talks about in the thinking about relationships, personal and professional relationships. You never want to make the assumption that your partner knows what you're thinking. And I talk about this a lot with admin and operations in general, actually, because we tend to have the personalities where we internally process. And then we forget, so-and-so can't read our mind. We have to actually voice what we were thinking about and what we want, what we need in order to be the best at our job or be the best in that relationship at home. And that's a big deal for us. And if we can do that, then we can be our best version of ourselves.
So I think that this comes up a lot between executives and their assistants. And I can think
a lot.
Between you and I have a hard time asking for help.
Oh, yeah.
Like, it's not very often that I say, hey, Margaret, can you do this? Right? But what we figured out as a hack to that is I need you to come ask me what you can help with. Right? And then I feel like that then is permission for me to ask you to do some things, which I'm sure not everybody has that problem. I'm sure there's plenty of executives that just bark out orders and ask for all sorts of things.
Yeah.
But I think we've figured out that in that dynamic between the executive and the admin, assumptions are the worst.
Oh, absolutely.
And if you want to light people on fire, make assumptions and act on them. Because you are really cheating communication. If you're not good at communication, you have to get better at it. And making assumptions doesn't make you better at it. It makes you worse at it.
Totally. And he talks about how you end up creating like this emotional poison because you create stories in your head and that are not true.
Yeah.
Over and over again.
And as a sales technique, I will say this. These last two agreements, don't make assumptions and don't take things personally. If you are wearing both of those hats at the same time, you are in an active listening mode where you're not reacting, you're listening. Because you're not reacting emotionally, you're not bristling, you're not trying to, figure out how this applies to you. But if you can just sit there, not take things personally, and don't make assumptions, that means you're 100% ready and able to listen to what the other person has to say. And the only thing that should come out of that is more questions, right?
Yeah.
Which leads to understanding. And that's what we're striving for, is, again, a shared perspective. Anything else on that, Margaret?
I think, well, he says, I just love his quotes, all human problems would be resolved if we could just have good, clear communication. I kind of believe that. And then for me, the other thing that really hit home, which I talked about a minute ago, was believing that my love will change this person. He talks about that on page 70. And like if you go into a relationship believing, oh, this person's so great except for this one thing, I think I could change that. And you lie to yourself and believe, you make an assumption and believe that you could actually do that. And that definitely is another thing in this book that helped me change kind of the way that I operate.
So I want to be a little edgy for a second. It's going to be daring a little bit. But I do want to challenge. I do want to say things that I think people may not expect if it stimulates ideas and good conversation. So you just reminded me when you talk about us trying to reach a shared perspective, or really what we're aiming for is good communication. I think as a society we're failing at this probably in ways we've never failed at it before. And so let me just say this, like Brett Kavanaugh, the Supreme Court Justice nominee that was just voted in. That is a hot issue that I feel like our country can't have a civilized conversation about. Because if you question or if you side with Kavanaugh, I don't know how to, not even side. If you entertain the idea that he's innocent until proven guilty, then that can isolate you from a lot of other people who have assumed his guilt, right? And I get it. I mean, I don't want someone to be in such a powerful position if they've used power in a negative terrible, negative way to hurt other people. At the same time, this happened when his prefrontal cortex wasn't developed. And I'm not saying that's an excuse for what he did, but I'm saying there's a lot of things people have done between the ages of 18 and 25 that they would never want to read about in the paper.
Sure.
Or be judged about later in life.
Yeah.
Or to be held to a certain level of responsibility at an age of 55 or 60. So, do you see that?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Ever since I've always been interested in hard conversations before I even knew it. I just have gotten better at being a part of them. Before I used to be more of an observer. But when I was in school studying social work, we had these really hard conversations all the time. And the best thing I think we can do is have someone who's able to speak up and speak out on both sides and start the conversation in a positive manner. And I think that's what we're lacking, are people who know how to handle themselves with their emotions and their reactions controlled in a way that promotes conversation and a good playing field. And so we have people that absolutely, when they speak up, end up isolating whole big crowds of people, big massive groups of people. And then there's no conversation because we're too busy yelling back and forth at one another. So what builds you to believe in someone again after they've done something that you don't agree with?
What builds them?
That's not the way to phrase. If someone did something to you, for instance, that you felt was horrible and awful, what would make you trust them again?
I mean, it would take time, but it would take awareness on their part and apology.
So I don't know enough about this guy's history to know like what's happened from 25 on. But what I would want to look at is, okay, what happened? And then from that age on, what have you done? Has anything else happened? How have you built your trust back up to be, to show that you're the new person that you said you wanted to be?
Yeah. I just think, here's what I think's happened. I think internet trolling is a virus that has become real in our day-to-day lives outside of the digital platform it was built on.
Yeah.
So now we're trolling in real life to the point where if you have an idea or a thought or an opinion, people just lash out at you without any conversation or questions or try any attempt at understanding.
Yeah.
And that makes me fearful for our society. That we can't, I mean, if you were an amazing candidate for Supreme Court Justice, you also have to want to embrace the giant crap show that's you're allowing into your life by even being considered for this. Let's just say, irregardless of what happened with Kavanaugh and Ford is true or not true or whatever, the reality is that the most information, the most data of impropriety they could find on him happened a long, long time ago, right? And he had to think, I haven't done anything wrong. I've lived a good life. I'm a professional, and I'm unimpeachable. And maybe he is, maybe he isn't. But if you are worthy of being in that position, we're losing people that are worthy.
Yeah.
That could be in that position because they don't want to bring that upon their family or upon their own head.
Yep.
Because there's this level of hate and a lack of communication that keeps people from acting honorably.
And I don't know that that's ever going to go away. Like, I can speak from a personal perspective. One of my cousins, Rob Johnson, is on the Seattle City Council. And he's, after this term is over, I don't know what he's going to decide to do, if he's going to decide to continue or not, because it has been one of the most, I'm sure, intense experiences of his life. And he is one of those people who's like, he's not going to say he's the best leader. He's very humble. He does his best by sitting back, observing, and then participating from what I've seen. And it's intense. If you step into one of those roles where you're in charge and a part of the decision-making process for a lot of people like that, yeah, it is a crapshoot. And that's when I was on the way to work this morning. Actually, I was listening to a podcast with Gary Vaynerchuk again, because I love him. And he talked about how you can't let 1 or 2 or maybe 1,000 comments or trolls on the internet get you down. Like, he does not recommend reading through those things, because you're going to have some random people that are just going to go online and bash people just for the hell of it with no explanation. So it's really unfortunate. But he says that he really truly believes, and I do too, that the negativity is it's loud, but it's only from a few people. There's actually a lot more happiness, a lot more positivity, and a lot more people with a good mindset. They're just not as loud as the negative people. We just need to get the people that are actually saying the good things and speaking appropriately louder.
Yeah.
So.
Well, the importance is communicating.
Yeah.
And I'm fearful for our society that we seem to be getting worse and worse at it.
Well, I think the conversations are happening. They're going to happen on a bigger and broader scale continuously. Because I agree with you. I mean, I'm sure that all of these issues happened prior, and just now with the internet and with things being much more public, it's more known. It's more so.
I mean, President Clinton did all sorts of things while he was president. That if he did that today, it would be a totally different story. He would have been impeached. I guarantee it.
Yeah.
I mean, so time,
it's just going to get worse with the access that everybody has online and to different people and Facebook.
It's interesting.
Media.
All right, the fourth agreement, always do your best. I mean, it seems pejorative, and what I mean by that is, like, it seems a little bit like a cliche or something I would say to my kids, and then I'd squeeze their cheek and I'd be, okay, Johnny, always do your best. But it's absolutely true, right?
Yeah. Well, and what do they say? Success is simple, not easy. And I think I definitely try to live by this, and I do. Even the little things I try to do to my best ability, and I know people think I'm crazy for it. I know that everybody that I work with now and in previous positions think that me going above and beyond on some little small thing doesn't matter, but I really do believe it matters, because I think of it as it's like building PR for myself. If someone knows that I have incredible follow through and then I'm going to do it even when they don't think I'm going to do it, that builds massive trust. And so this is such leverage that I don't think people take advantage of. I've taken full advantage of this. And my mom showed me what the ROI was on that. When you do your best and you follow through on everything, all of a sudden, when you need help or you need something, 20 people stand up to help you rather than no one or one.
Well, you attract opportunities as well, right?
Yeah.
Like, if people know you're going to follow through, they want you on your team.
Absolutely. Yeah. 100%.
So on page 78, he says, doing your best, you are going to live your life intensely. You're going to be productive. You're going to be good to yourself, because you will be giving yourself to your family, to your community, to everything. But it is the action that is going to make you feel intensely happy. When you always do your best, you take action. Doing your best is taking the action because you love it, not because you're expecting a reward. So, yeah, I just, someone asked, or I heard it, or I read it somewhere, but essentially the question was this: Because we all have good days, we have bad days. There's good cycles, there's bad cycles. If you could live your life and you could choose one of two options, meaning you had a life full of extreme highs and extreme lows, but it cycled through them, random amount of times. But you would have a certain amount of highs and a certain amount of lows throughout your life, your existence. Or it could be static. You could just have an average experience, no highs, no extreme highs, no extreme lows, your entire life. Which one do you choose?
Well, that second one sounds like hell. Complete hell.
To you and I, it does.
Yes.
So I think, you know what? If I only had extreme lows in my life, then I'd probably choose the average life, right?
Yeah.
I've had extreme highs in my life. And once you've had extreme highs, man, you'll suffer through the lows to get back there. Because I love that part, doing your best, you're going to live your life intensely. And I am a passionate person. Am I not, Margaret?
Yes, I think that's definitely a yes.
And I am intense. And I love the idea that if I want a passionate and intense life, all I have to do is do my best. And it works in every aspect of my life. Yeah,
I mean, there's I wish we knew what the percentage was. There's such a small percentage of people that are actually trying. It's unbelievable. So when you do your best, you can really stick out from the crowd, whether it be professional, personal, whatever it is, and people notice. And that's the hard thing too for me is it's funny. I don't mind standing in front of a group of people and teaching a class or something, but I actually don't love a ton of attention. And so when someone points, that's what I've had to get used to. When someone points it out and says, Margaret, you're doing this miracle morning thing. That's super cool. That's so crazy. Like, that's weird. Why are you getting up at 5 a.m. and doing that? I've had to be okay with that. And it's not easy, but once you get used to it, then it's like, oh, I don't care. People can think I'm crazy, but if once they begin to see the ROI of it, then they want to do it too.
Well, I love what you're doing because you have been so good about habit stacking. And so for those that don't know what that is, it's like literally she'll do something for 66 days. And then once it's a habit, she'll do a new one. And then you just keep doing that. And over time, what that results in is a bunch of small adaptations that make big change. Right?
Yeah, that's what I was listening to Joe Rogan on the way in this morning, all these mindset people. And Joe talks a lot about all these habits that when you stack them and you do them consistently, even on days when you feel like shit, that's when the real work comes.
The first swear word came from Margaret.
That's kind of a good word. Because it's doing what you need to do when you don't want to do it. And there's plenty of days when I come into the office and I don't feel like going through my email. I don't feel like sitting down and working on that Excel spreadsheet that I know I'm supposed to get done by the end of the day or should get done. But it's when I can do that I can force my body to follow what my mind says to do. And that's when I feel like you cross that threshold.
Well, there's a compound effect, right?
Yeah.
By you doing this habit stacking and then doing those habits ritualistically, you now have a compound effect on your life. And that's when people come up to you and say, Margaret, how'd you do this?
Yeah.
And it's so funny to you, and I've been there, right? It's so funny to you because it's like, how do you not know how I do this? Like, all you have to do is look.
Yeah.
All you have to do is see. All you have to do is watch me.
Yeah.
And that comes from people knowing that you're committed to doing this by getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning. And by you talking about it and by you protecting that time. And then when people never see that, though, right?
No. Yeah.
They see the result.
Yeah.
They don't see the work. They see the result.
Yeah. Gary was talking about that again this morning, too, about he gets so many comments from people. You're so lucky where you're at. You're so blessed. You're so everything. And he's like, I want to remind you of that Saturday when I was 21 and I was working for 10 hours a day in the liquor store at his dad's liquor store. And yeah, people don't see me on the weekends. Like I take the weekends for personal time for sure, but I'm constantly brainstorming on like what else we can be doing in the business, what else I could be doing in the admin world. It's a constant and it's not work for me. It's fun. And I think when you enjoy it, like he talks about in here, when you enjoy the action, that's when you're successful. If you hate what you're doing every day, get out of it. Come talk to me.
All right, so that's the 4 agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz. We highly, highly encourage you to read this book if you haven't already.
Yeah.
If you know anyone that's struggling with a belief system and knowing what they believe in, or knowing how to operate, or they need a guide on maybe how to modify their life, I highly, highly recommend this book.
Yeah.
And as a business owner, it's instrumental in coaching. I want to say this, and then we can wrap it up. But the reason we read books as a team every week, we read a couple chapters of a book every week. And the reason we do that is so that we have a shared language. So that I can, if Margaret has a problem, I can just say, be impeccable with your word. And that downloads a whole bunch of information to you, right? In a sentence. Yeah. And because we have this shared language, it is a hack. It's a communication hack, right? And so I will say this, as if you're a leader of a business or a company, or you coach anyone, reading books
it's essential.
Is a hack for communication.
Yeah.
So please read books, and then please share them with the people that you care about and that you love and the people that work for you, because it shortens the lead time to the success, which is I'm always a big fan of.
Totally.
All right, everybody. Thank you for listening to our podcast about the 4 agreements. If you have read this book, maybe leave some comments. Let us know. If you have been inspired to read it, let us know as well.
Yeah, I'd love to hear what steps you take in your life after reading this.
And we look forward to future podcasts, including interviews with other people. We're going to be mixing it up quite a bit. This will not be a book review podcast. That is just today's episode.
Yeah.
But thank you very much for listening, and we'll see you soon.
See you soon.